defer it? Do you want to defer it?
Yes.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the May 26th meeting of the Finance Committee. Mr. Price and Mr. Sides is on the Zoom meeting, as well as Dr. Houlihan and Mrs. McLam, excuse me. The next, I have a couple changes to the agenda. We're going to take 1C, approval of the minutes, off. And we're going to move 2C, laptop lease agreement, to number E under 3. It's not ready yet, so we're just going to discuss it. It's not for approval. So I need a motion to approve the amended agenda.
Motion to approve the amended agenda.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. The next item is budget amendments and transfers. Shauna.
Just wanted to see if you guys have any questions. Right now, I've been budgeting additional funding from the state. We had some federal amendments and transfers that had already been gone through. We're at a point in the year where we got to start doing cleanup and making sure that all of the budget lines are covered. The capital funding is also the carryover dollars, not carryover, the true-up funds. So we've got those budgeted, and then I've got multiple different revenue sources, a few grants that have come through that I've done in our special revenue fund. And we had some transfers. When they do amendments with federal, they also do transfers to cover any overages in any specific lines.
So the one that's a specific fund, that's what again?
Fund, that's where most of our grants in the special revenue fund.
Okay.
So those are mostly grants. We've got driver's ed, we've got our Medicaid money for EC, a few Kiwanis, and like our coffee nut that we're running for our EC students. Just some cleanup work that we do through year end. Anything that's come in, we're just budgeting that revenue. Most of that will roll into next year.
Okay, great, thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
No.
No. Okay, so I need a motion to recommend it to the Board of Education, the budget amendments and transfers to the full board.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Thank you. Okay, next is the fiscal 2021 resolution for interim appropriations. We do this every year at this time of year, correct? Okay.
Correct. Yeah, we need the authority to spend when July 1st rolls around, so we usually do it at the June board meeting.
Okay.
So once we actually have our full budget and all of our budget information, you'll get the actual budget resolution. Well, who knows when that might be, as soon as we have it.
Does anyone have any questions on that? Not?
Shauna, the chances are we won't have it, right? Since the state doesn't have a budget?
Well, correct. At some point, we have to do a budget based on whatever information we have at the time. Right. So it just depends on how long it takes for some of the action to take place in the General Assembly for us to get state allotments. So.
Any other questions? If
Motion
not,
to recommend to the full board.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. Second from Todd. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
The next item is so those are the two items that'll go to the full board on June 2nd. The first thing is the budget, the fiscal 21 budget update. Several of us listened to the Board of County Commissioners special meeting where they discussed budgets last week. I listened to it to just the part about the Union County Public Schools budget. They didn't really go into any detail whatsoever. They didn't talk about our budget except that it was over $5.1 million over what the allocation was supposed to be for fiscal 21. A couple of the commissioners asked some questions, one of which was enrollment, and they seem to think that enrollment is going down. At 20-day last year, we were at 41,400, or right in that range, but we expect it to go up, and the DPI expects it to go up about 500 students, correct, Shauna? Okay.
That's correct. Our next year's projection is like 41.9 in that range. So, yeah.
Okay, so that's good to know. We used to have a chart in our slide deck a couple years ago that had the year-over-year changes, or maybe we need to update that so they can understand it.
Because it included charter students as well, so we can definitely do that.
Yeah, I also wanted to remind everyone that when we look at enrollment, it's for the county, not just for UCPS, and that's why we included the increase to charter payments as well. So,
right. The other thing that they talked about is whether or not that we had any savings from school being closed, and I assume we'll address some of this directly with the county commissioners themselves. But we've asked that question as a board and as a finance committee, and really there's not any, because we continue to pay all of our state employees throughout this crisis, but the county doesn't have state employees. So I think that that's where the difference is, that we haven't had any savings, maybe a little bit in electricity or something for the schools that aren't open all the time. But the other thing that they brought up was gas for the buses. That's state funding, correct, Shauna? Okay, that is state funding. That's what I thought.
And might I add, any savings in state funding is going to revert back to the state, correct? It's not like we get to keep it.
Right. We have some local accounts that mirror state accounts, that because there are a lot of the funds that we get from state that doesn't fully operationally that we can operate on. So there are local accounts that would we would definitely try to make sure we spend all the state funds that we can. But there, any remaining funds in any specific account that we can't use for anything else will revert back to the state.
Right.
There are many districts that have asked for the ability to carry over funds into next year, and there's been no movement. That takes action from the General Assembly, and they've not. I think they're probably anticipating that there'll be districts that revert funds back that they can then reallocate next year.
Okay, great. The other question is, one of the commissioners called it double dipping, so I just want to tackle that one. Again, a lot of our stuff is, all of our employees are state employees. They get the state's what was called the Emergency Care Act.
They got emergency leave. They had the North Carolina emergency leave.
And we talked about the fact, and we'll get to it when we get to the state relief funding and the CARES Act funding, but because this was brought up during the budget update, I wanted people to understand that our after-school program and our school nutrition program are enterprise funds, and that means that they operate out of their own revenue as like a separate entity. So when nobody is buying lunches or nobody is paying to go to after-school care, there's no revenue coming in. We are still paying these employees, and we're using the state relief funding and to pay that, correct? So everybody is getting paid throughout the school year.
Yes.
Okay.
That was the intention from the General Assembly, I believe, and from the state level, that I think for multiple reasons, they intended that if we had the funds budgeted for those staff members, that we would continue paying them under these conditions.
Right, and there was no double dipping. We're using the relief funding to pay our enterprise fund employees as we go. The other one was that they talked about freezes that the county had on hiring and travel, and they don't call it professional development, but same idea, training, I think they called it. I want everybody to know that we too have been doing that throughout this school year, and we'll probably continue to do a lot of that next year. So that's where we are as well. And those are the things that I heard from the short part that they talked about the school's budget. Shauna or Dr. Houlihan, do you have any different recollection?
I have a question. Drew, has the county manager or anyone from the county finance department reached out to you specifically with questions?
Yeah, the assistant or deputy county manager, I can't remember what her title is, Michelle Lancaster, gave me a correspondence over the weekend regarding questions. I'm happy to share that with the finance committee. But I've indicated to her that Shauna McLam would be running point on answering those. And so I got that over the weekend. And again, I'm happy to share that with you all.
Would you
That
please?
was great, thank you. So any other questions, committee members, on the fiscal 21 budget update?
We have, we do not have any formal co-meetings scheduled with the county between now and budget approval, correct? Joint meetings scheduled?
We have none. Gary and I talked, Mr. Sides and I talked about this last night. We may want to reach out to the county commissioners and discuss what's going on with our budget, and maybe if they don't want to have a joint meeting, maybe we can do 2-on-1s or something like that to have conversations with them.
I would agree with Ms. Heintel. If there are questions, I think a question regarding or a comment regarding possible double dipping with state emergency funding tells me that there's a significant gap in understanding what is going on. And we need to clarify that not only for the county, but for the public as well.
Okay.
Would it be appropriate for Kathy, for you and Melissa to reach out to the board to ask for some type of dialogue directly with the county commissioners?
Yes. I will talk to Mrs. Merrill when we get off this call. Their budget, the county's recommended budget, will be presented to the board on June 1st at the BOCC. I'm going to tune into that. And they're supposed to adopt the budget on the 15th. So we need to start having those conversations quickly.
Yeah, and I would say just showing up as any public citizen is welcome at their meeting on the 15th for the public hearing.
I don't know if they're allowing, are they allowing public at their meetings yet? I know that they hold theirs in person. We can find out.
Yeah, I mean, any public input at the meeting on the 15th is really going to be too late, I fear, for our purposes. And I don't want any of these misconceptions or questions to linger as long as possible. I wanted them to be addressed so that they understand the seriousness of our request sooner rather than later.
I agree. Well, I hope that Shauna, I know she's super busy already, but she can get out the answers to their questions if there's not too many this week, so that we can then follow up with the commissioners as well. So, okay. Next is the fiscal 21 redirects, and I wanted to put this on the agenda because we never really talked about some of the redirects on our budget. We've been getting some emails from parents with respect to the IBPP program, and that is one of the redirects because that's the transportation redirects for $190,000. Unfortunately, the financial realities surrounding any government budget these days requires us to look at programs and different things to see if there's any way we have some cost savings. We would love to continue to do the transportation for IB, but it's very expensive. and we just can't keep all of our programs in place while we need, as much money as we do to keep it going. We're on year 2 of no budget from the state, and we need to look at anything we can. We also, one of the other redirects was the Naviance software program, and that's going to be talked about at the curriculum meeting. And we had a couple of other programming with DLI, the dual language program that has already been rolled out to the schools. So I just wanted people to know that we take it seriously when we have to cut programming or cut transportation or cut support in any way, but we're focusing on the classroom and making sure that our classrooms aren't touched by any budget. And not having a budget for a state budget for all of last year was already very challenging. If we're going into year 2 of no state budget, it is going to get even more challenging. Every article that you read about education talks about budget cuts and things like that. So we really had to take a good look at our budget this year and do what we had to do. I know it's difficult for families, and I feel bad, but this is the financial realities we're in today. Mrs. McLam or Dr. Houlihan, do you have anything else to say on that?
No, I was just going to add that I think you're exactly right. If you read any national publication or even statewide, while we've had absolutely, no indication from the state on potential cuts for next year, we have to be prepared for that. And given the impact of COVID-19 and a lot of still unknowns for next year, transportation costs, as an example, is one that there are a lot of questions right now on what we can do, what we can afford, how many bus drivers we have. Do we have enough buses, even for right now, to do things like social distancing? So, as we start to look ahead to reopening, Ms. Heintel, I think you're right. We've had to make some really tough decisions on what we can and can't do going into a year where, if you thought there was uncertainty before, just wait. I mean, we're really trying to figure this out. So anything that we can do now to focus on the classroom and making sure that we are really focusing on our teachers, our students in their classes, I think that's got to be the priority.
Agreed.
Ms. McLam, would you, I don't have the budget proposal in front of me. What is the total amount of redirects we are proposing for our next budget?
$1.3 million.
So just so everybody understands, that's $1.3 million that we felt necessary to redirect, as Ms. Heintel says, to focus on the classroom. So I want people to understand that we are going through and reevaluating everything to make sure our focus is on the classroom. And as Dr. Houlihan said, there's so much uncertainty. We're trying to do everything we can to be prepared for the uncertain.
Okay, if there's no other questions on that, we can move on to state relief funding. Mrs. McLam.
I shared with you all two slides really that were shared with the finance officers and finance departments across the state from Alexis Schaust, who is over school business at BPI. This just sort of gives you an idea of what the funding for COVID relief from the state and from the CARES Act sort of encompasses. I want to.
So the money that we received under the state, the $1.4 million, 1.4, right?
So, right, the initial state relief funds that we received was right at $1.4 million. Those are the funds that we're currently using to offset the lost receipts for school nutrition and after school, as well as the additional expenses we have for printing printed materials for our students while we've been out, and other sanitation needs that we've encountered through the COVID situation that we're in. So
and that initial $1.4 million has been used.
Correct. It really was just enough to cover for school nutrition lost receipts. They're only running 4 sites right now, but they're paying everyone. So
So
Yeah,
let's be
those
clear.
funds are not part of this. Those were
Okay.
separate from these funding sources. That was just the initial where they pulled back funds statewide. They reverted our summer reading program funds allocations and other funding sources so that they could distribute that initial state funding.
So what's the second tranche of the funding from the state or federal, whatever you want to use?
So this is, that's what's on the third slide that I sent you all. That's the third or the second piece of this funding. So House Bill 1043 had multiple different funding that was allocated for statewide spending and allocation. Currently, we've not received any indication of how much money we're getting.
Okay, that's what I was asking. What's our portion? Okay.
Yeah.
The only one we got was for school nutrition. We got a planning allotment for, I think, 1.3 again for school nutrition receipting or lost receipts to cover any expenses that they have to replenish food and other items related.
And that's for this year or for next year?
So all of these funds in House Bill 1043 have a spending deadline of December 31st. So
2020?
Yes.
What?
The 2020, yes, yes.
And that is to replenish the enterprise fund for school
Right.
nutrition.
Well, they're in 1040, in House Bill 1043 was all the funding pieces. So there were funds specific to school nutrition that we got a allocation for, and it was specific for, yes, lost receipts. I don't know exactly how they determine. I know you had to be a part of the summer feeding program and some other things that they use to determine how to allocate those funds.
So when do we anticipate knowing what our allotment of that funding is? Do we have any idea? We have no idea. Okay.
I don't really know. I know the state board met on Thursday. They were going to go through some of those things. We were supposed to have a state DPI update today, but they canceled it until next week. So I'm assuming that some of that is because they know we all have questions about when are we going to get our money and how much is our portion. So we've tried to come up with, a general idea for each funding source, but there's really only about 5 of these funding sources that we'll get a direct allocation for. Some of them, they will have an application process and they will do sort of like a grant funding for some of these state funds. So we're working through all of that. It just depends on the application. I mean, we just last week on Friday afternoon, I had a regional meeting to discuss the CARES Act funding, which is separate from House Bill 1043. So, but I just wanted to share with you, at least you can kind of see visually what funds are available from the state level. And there will be really the left half of that presentation or that slide deck for House Bill 1043 will be the allocations for, they've got some allocations in there for devices, for summer learning, which I know academics is working on, some contracted mental health, which really they've only put $10 million in there for the entire state for contracted mental health. And our portion of that will be very small. There are some funds in there for learning management systems and other items, but like I said, we really haven't seen any planning allotments yet. So I know there was some approvals that were taking place at the state board meeting on Thursday. So I'm hoping to see some of those will come out this week.
Great, thank you.
So we don't know.
Go ahead, Gary.
I was going to say, we don't know if this will be allotted by number of students or modified by level of poverty of the school district or by Title I qualifying schools. We don't, the legislation does not spell out at all the funding formulas other than some is a grant and other is going to be directly appropriated.
Right. I would assume there's probably going to be some ADM, like a per pupil type allocation, plus, as you said, something, some factor in there related to your low wealth. So I would assume there's going to be multiple different factors that they use to do that allocation. That's what makes it hard to determine. I mean, I can come up with a general idea, but it's hard to really say how much we'll receive.
Can you send these slides to the full board for the board meeting on the 2nd, just so they have the idea too, under the FYI
Yeah,
stuff?
because it sort of gives you, like Senate Bill 704 was all the details,
Yes.
and House Bill 1043 was all the money. So trying to piece a lot of this together, and DPI is doing, school business, they're doing the best they can to kind of pull all this together as quickly as possible to give guidelines and charts of accounts so you know how you can spend the dollars. And that's been the question. It's really hard to plan until you know what you can and can't spend the dollars on. You have general idea, but they may put in some, the state board may have some specific requirements or exclusions that they write in.
And
And then we have the CARES Act funding, which I think is, do you want to move on to that, or I'm sorry?
Yeah.
I had one. Oh, go ahead, Kathy.
No, go ahead.
I had one other question. So both pieces of legislation, the House bill and the Senate bill, have been approved and signed by the governor and are in effect.
Yes. We got, in our email, Gary, we have a couple different organizations who summarized it for us. I'll forward it to you guys again, just so you have it.
So now they just have to figure out how to divvy it up, and that's the State Board of Education's responsibility.
And that's the same with the federal money, right? DPI is in charge of divvying it up, correct? Yes.
Correct, and coming up with a process to do the allocations. So
you can talk about both. Go ahead.
okay, so with the CARES Act funding, DPI was tasked with providing an application process. They determined that they would use a similar application process that they do with some of our other entitlement grants. They just released that like Thursday, I think. And then I had a regional meeting on Friday to go through what items, how we need to go through this. There is a portion that has to be allocated or set aside for private schools. We have a meeting today to do some preliminary work to find out how many of them are interested in receiving any funds. Do they want to go through some of this process? We're trying to do a needs assessment as well. So we're trying to get some of this done because they've given us a June 1st deadline for submission of application. And some of that is related to the fact that if we don't get approved applications and apply for the funds as quickly as possible, then school business cannot do the allocations of those funds after July 1st. It would push it back to probably October before they could do some of those allocations, because once they get into the new school year, they're worried about state budgets and trying to get some of those allocations and funding processed, and it is a process for them to do that across the state. So they're going to be focused on state allotments. So they've given us that June 1st deadline. The CARES Act funds has a September 31st of 2021 spending deadline. They have given us a little bit of detail about, we can do very I would say more general bucket type allocations for the CARES Act funding. We're not submitting a budget right now. We're just submitting a plan for approval so that when we can submit the budget, that they can allocate those funds. So that's why the June 1st deadline is so important. So I know you all wanted us to talk through some of that. So I just wanted to let you know that we'll submit our application for June 1st, but then we will put through the budget process and doing those budgeted items once those funds are released. So just so you all.
What are you hearing, Dr. Houlihan and Mrs. McLam? What are you hearing about a state budget for this year?
I'm hearing nothing. I'm hearing just basically to plan on what you had from the 18-19 school year, that it would be the second year in a row with no new dollars, other than what we talked about previously, which is looking across the nation and the impact on loss of revenues and whether or not we actually might have cuts. But that even hasn't been confirmed either. So
Okay.
It's really been very quiet on that piece.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Does
I
anyone else have any questions? Go ahead.
Yes, please. Shauna, or Dr. Houlihan, do you have any general ideas of how we can best apply whatever CARES Act funding we receive, how that would be, what we would seek to use that funding for, or be required to use it for?
One of the things that I did attach on the agenda was what came out of the state board meeting on Thursday was an allotment I guess you'd call it some allotment details on the CARES Act funding. So they do give us some broad categorical type spending that we can use the funds on. They will allow you to use it for some training. They'll allow you to use it to address some of our low income students or anyone with specific needs. So there are multiple items in here that we have availability for spending, and they are requiring us to follow the federal guidelines for procurement, but they have relieved the supplanting piece of this so that it should be able to help us make it through this school year in anticipation of there being some unknowns from the state budget. So that's another reason why we want to get the application done and approved so that as we move through next year, we can maybe make some amendments, budget according to the needs we're going to have. And some of that's still unknown.
I guess my point is that these funds, both the state and the CARES Act, is meant to address emergency costs that we're encountering because of this day and time. It is not meant to supplant regular operating expenses or costs we would have if we were back in normal times. These are to try and address the emergency situation and the
Correct.
additional expenses that we're encountering and trying to prepare for the unknown.
Correct. Well, the CARES Act funding is also meant to help offset and address any maybe learning loss that we've had over this time period with being out of school for so long, and addressing specific categories to help make sure that we have enough resources to address those when school starts.
And
For instance, would something qualify such as if we had a census of all the students that don't have internet at home, we could use some of this funding to acquire additional hotspots or to equip buses as hotspots for Wi-Fi in order to be able to work remotely. So required.
Can I address that? Because everybody keeps saying, why aren't we putting buses out with we have given out hotspots to anybody who has asked for it. There are portions of the county that even if you have a hotspot or you have a bus with hotspots on it, you still cannot get reception.
that is correct. And I'll also add that I'll add one comment on the bus piece. Then I want to come back, Gary, to your question. It also has been, we found out that through the research that your busing hotspots really carry a radius of about 30 yards. So if you can imagine driving a bus out to a rural part of our county and setting that in a church parking lot or on the side of the road, there's really nowhere to park a bus for someone to come to it to get access. If you're in a more urban environment, what you could find is that these buses are parked in front of apartment complexes where children or families could access it through that. So the logistics of putting a hotspot on a bus and having kids that can get access to it is very complex in your rural environment, which is where we have most of our connectivity issues. To go back to your first question, Mr. Sides, the short answer is yes on the connectivity. We also have to look ahead to we're required also by law to provide a Jumpstart program. That's what they're calling summer learning plans for rising first through fifth graders that have been identified as at risk or in need of improvement or needing kind of a catch up, specifically with literacy. Now, that Jumpstart program, which is intended to last 2 weeks, is some of like what you might used to have known as the summer reading plan or summer reading camps. Those have basically been deferred to begin the first week of August, not for all children, but for children that we identify and need. And so you got to start thinking about, well, how are you going to pay for teachers to come in to teach? Is that going to be face-to-face? Can it be virtual? Which it can be. And so in that case, where our kids have a device by then, will they have connectivity? So a lot of these things we're still thinking through that we could use these available funds to offset that cost, which has not been budgeted locally.
And I guess that you talked about grades 1 through 5, right? So grades 1 and 2 wouldn't have devices.
Unless we found a way to use this money to provide it, or gave them an older device that, you know, is currently sitting in our classrooms.
That assumes it will get the funding before August. Okay.
I guess my whole reason for the questioning was to address the concerns of, hey, we're getting these state funds, we're getting these emergency federal funds. Where are they going, and why is that not should be taken into consideration for our next fiscal year budget? And I wanted to reiterate what I'm hearing, that these funds are used to address the emergency situation we're in, not to make use of it in the expenses we incur in a regular, I'll call it regular school year, of teacher salaries or
Right.
or buying new buses.
The purpose of the CARE Act, it says, is intended to assist eligible public school units during the novel coronavirus pandemic. So it's anything to do with that. A lot of the same stuff that the state relief funding was for as well. But if you could send this to the full board too, just so they understand what it can be used for as well. Okay, anything else on that?
No, ma'am.
Okay. The next item is the laptop lease agreement. As you know, we put into our budget new laptop lease for grades 3 through 5. Currently, grades 3 through 5 do not have a laptop lease at all. They were paid for 8 years ago, and they are they are falling apart. One of the reasons that we couldn't give the 3 through 5 students laptops to take home during this is because they're very delicate and not in great working condition, and their parts are difficult to come by. So we put in a request with the county to have a new laptop lease for grades 3 through 5. It would be a 5-year lease at $710,000 a year. And remember, we also have teacher admin laps, which are about $1.7 million a year. And this will be year 3 of the administrator ones. And the grades 6 through 12 is year two at $635,000. So there you go. Just wanted to, but now we're going to talk a little bit about 5-year versus other years. So just plan.
Jay Parker has been working with my finance department. We've been working together to try to figure out if we can get funding and do a lease that maybe would allow us to do a shorter term. A 48-month lease would allow us the ability to not have to go through the multiple approval processes that it takes through the local government commission, as well as through the BOCC, all the resolutions and paperwork, just because it takes a little bit longer. It's moving our timeline back a little bit. So we had open conversation about trying to see what we could do, if we could make that happen. Right now, a couple of the options really don't seem to be, unless you all want to entertain it. One of the options that we were given, we haven't seen what the interest rate is on it yet, was to do something that tiered each year. So in year 1, our quarterly payments would be would tier up each year about $40,000 to $50,000. So the payment you had in year 1 would be right around what we have budgeted or is part of our budget request. But then in year 2, we would have to request more, allocate more dollars for that. So that gets us the ability to order laptops to have them here quicker, because we could go ahead and order them and potentially have them here when school starts. I just don't know that having a tiered lease payment like that and anticipating that increase, is easier to do the lease that we know it's a 5-year lease or a 4-year lease, and the payment's the same each month or each quarter, and for annual payments. So we've looked at that. We've also got multiple financial institutions that have submitted proposals to us with much lower, fairly low interest rates. We could probably get a 5-year lease, a little less than what we've gotten out of what we've gotten allocated in our budget right now in the capital line. So we're still working through some of that. We had hoped to have some of that for you all today to review. We might have something this afternoon that maybe we could bring to SPIT committee. If not, I just wanted you all to know that we're trying to work through and find the most cost effective and the quickest way to try to get these laptops here, but we're going to do it in a very prudent fashion. If we're unable to do a 48-month lease, just so you all know the timeline, once the board approves it, it will go to the county commissioners. The BOCC will have to approve a resolution, and then we will submit that to the local government commission. They will then review it and provide their approval. That puts us to ordering laptops probably sometime the end of July, first part of August, because we're trying to hit all of those dates of when they have to have the documentation so that they can put it on their board agendas. So I just kind of wanted to give you all an idea of where that puts us. Most likely, if we're not able to do those orders until late in the school, later on, it may be September or later before we get them in the hands.
So if we did and the county approves the capital budget on June 15th, as their calendar indicates, what did Mr. Parker say about when we would be able to get the 3 through 5 laptops in if we went with a 4-year lease instead of a 5?
We could definitely get them ordered immediately and would be able to get them here. And he was working and negotiating, trying to get them sent in pallets, just like we need them with the cases on them and ready to go so that we could deploy them by the time school starts.
Okay, so if you get the information later today and it goes to SPIT, then it can go to the full board. If it doesn't, we're going to have a quick meeting on Tuesday night to look at the thing and recommend it to the full board, or you can put it on the regular agenda at the board meeting.
All right, we'll try to see what we can do today. I know it's kind of a waiting game. We've gotten a couple of different ones in, and so we're still working through some of the numbers. So.
Okay. And again, if it doesn't happen until for the June 2nd meeting, we can just put it on the regular agenda, and anybody who has any questions can ask them at that point in time. Does anyone else have any questions regarding the laptops?
No.
Okay. Any other questions at all? The next meeting is to be determined. I'll let you know if we need to have a quick meeting before the board meeting, or we just put it on the full agenda then. Anything else?
Dr. Houlihan, could you, whatever was appropriate, I'd like to see some of the questions that Ms. Lancaster has for us regarding our budget request.
He already sent it. He emailed it, forwarded it.
Sent it to us already?
Yes. Okay, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thanks. You too.